vanity of vanities. All things are vanity. Don't you love it? And what a great statement. Problem is, for Americans, we would look at that and say, this guy needs an attitude adjustment. But does he? This is a man who's looking at the situation of his life, who has, as he said, labored with wisdom, and now all of a sudden, as he's looking at the possibility of dying, the question is, who's going to get all of his junk? Somebody who hasn't labored, somebody who may not be very wise, someone who's going to waste everything. So it's vanity. But more than that, he recognized something within himself. That all of these pursuits that he was about, he couldn't sleep at night because he was too worried about all of his things, too worried about money, too worried about possessions, too worried about the next business thing. He wasn't at peace. That's where he realized, this is stupid. This is vanity. What am I doing? Now, in the gospel reading, we hear about a man coming to Jesus and say, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." Now, again, we would look at that and say, wait a minute, if your parents died and they left you an inheritance and one sibling is taking it all for himself, we would say that's not right. That's unjust. Jesus said, avoid greed in all its forms. So maybe that's what we need to really be looking at. The vanity, the selfishness, the greed, the materialism. That's what our Lord is telling us to watch out for. So in the second reading, St. Paul tells us that we are to look toward the things of heaven, not the things of earth. Think about what is above, he said, not the things of earth. So we have Qoheleth thinking about the things of earth, and he can't sleep. We have this man in the gospel who's all worked up because he's not getting some money. We have the man in the parable who pulls down his barn because they're not big enough to fit all of his junk in it. So he builds a bigger one so he can put all of his stuff in there. Well, thankfully, as Americans, we don't have barns to tear down. So what do? We go and rent a storage space because we don't have enough attic and basement space or garage space, so we have to rent more space for what? To put our things in there. And it's in a storage space, so probably we're not even going to look at them for years. But here again is where you see the absolute vanity. We can't get rid of them. They are so important that we have to rent a storage locker to put our stuff in because we can't get rid of it. Why? Because you were told somehow or another that this was so important. This was going to make you happy. This was going to make you fulfilled. This is so incredibly important for your life. You have to have it. That's why it's in the storage locker, because you need it. That's why it's in your basement and why it's in your attic, because you absolutely have to have this thing. It's so important to your day-to-day existence that you put it in storage. Vanity of vanities. Suddenly we begin to see what this man is talking about. Maybe it's not that he needs an attitude adjustment. Maybe we do. We need to ask ourselves, Where is our focus? Each one of us can look within our own self and ask that question. Am I focused on the things of heaven, where Christ is already seated at the right hand of the Father, and because I'm baptized into Jesus, I am seated there with him? Or is my focus on the things of earth? Now, mind you, again, these things are not necessarily evil. I mean, obviously we can be involved in some evil things, but assuming that we're not involved in evil things, the money by itself isn't evil, the material things by themselves aren't evil, the business things aren't evil. But if we are putting too much emphasis on those things, we need to get rid of them. Why? Because they're pulling us away from God. And if they're pulling us away from God, then there's only one direction that we can be being pulled in. And since there are only two possibilities of where you're going to spend eternity, it's either with God or away from God. If it's pulling you away from God, then it's pulling you toward hell. Are our material things really worth it? So we really need to look at that. Now, compared to some of the other things St. Paul is talking about, this might be a little bit not that big a deal. St. Paul says, put to death the parts of you that are earthly. And listen to the words, put to death the parts of you that are earthly. Now, mind you, he wrote this 2,000 years ago. And think about our circumstances here in America today. He might just as well have been standing here writing it. Immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, greed, lying. Welcome to America. He said, put it to death. Get rid of it. Why? Because it's dragging us down to hell. He's saying, put your focus on the things of heaven and live your life in that direction. But if our lives are being lived in the wrong direction, what good is it? And so think about where your focus is. What is it that's most important? I have to get this new house. I have to get this car. I have to have this thing, whatever it is. But then you got to remember, one day you're going to die and you're not going to take it with you. And if it drags you the wrong way, and this is the humorous part, your $1 million piece of junk can drag you to hell, but guess what? You can't take it with you to hell. You wouldn't want it in heaven anyway, so that's not going to be an issue. But if you go the wrong way, you're not going to have it. And who are you going to brag it about with it? I had $1 million thing. Nobody's going to care. So what good is it? That's what we have to look at. If there is something that is pulling you the wrong direction, get rid of it. Put it to death. And you might say, but it's worth $1 million. Is it worth going to hell for $1 million? I don't think so. Because we're talking eternity. This life, even if you live to be 100, is such a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what your life is. Your soul is immortal. Your soul is going to live forever. Choose wisely where you're going to live forever, because there are only two options, as I mentioned. This life is about making the choice of where we're going to spend eternity. And so ask yourself, which way am I going? Be careful just because we can say, well, but I believe in Jesus. I go to church on Sunday. That's all good. But that's not enough. We bought into this false nonsense of as long as you believe in Jesus, you're going to heaven. Jesus said, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, is going to enter the kingdom of heaven. So he made it pretty clear that just believing in him isn't enough. We have to do something with that belief. Our material things aren't going to get us to heaven. So, yeah, we have to work. We have to pay bills. We have to live. That's not an issue. The issue is, where is our focus? Are we working for the glory of God and for the good of others? Or are we working so that we can have more and more and more for me? What's the focus? Is the focus of your life trying to get to heaven? Or is the focus of your life pulling you away from heaven? The Lord told us that life does not consist of riches. In fact, he put it a little more strongly in another place. He said, what does it gain a man if he has the entire world and loses his soul in the process? Because when he dies, the world's going to be left behind. His soul won't be. It's not worth losing salvation. There is absolutely nothing in this world that is worth losing your salvation. So no matter how valuable the thing is in monetary sense, whatever it might be, if it's standing in the way, if it's keeping you from getting closer to God, get rid of it. Draw near to the Lord. That's what St. Paul is asking us to do. That's what Jesus is asking us to do. To be rich in the things of God. Where is the treasure? Because Jesus told us where our treasure is, that's where our heart's going to be. So again, just ask yourself, what is most important? My bank account, my stuff, or my spiritual life? That's going to tell you the direction you're going. Because other things aren't evil. But if they become our priority, they pull us the wrong way. So, vanity of vanities. All this stuff is going to pass away, and we're not taking any of it with us. Therefore, come back to the words of St. Paul and take his advice. Think about what is above, not what is of earth.